Did I do a good job with recalling the plot of this book? I'm not sure. Hi guys and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Neha and welcome to the June wrap-up. Before getting into the month of reading that has been, let us just quickly recap how my best reads and my most disappointing reads of 2022 have been going. I've been rating the best and the least favorite books in each of my monthly wrap-ups, and these are the current standings. My best books are up on your screen right now. It's quite a diverse playing range, and talking about my least favorite books, they have also been quite different from usual, and some of them were my most anticipated reads and they disappointed, so that's why they find themselves up on this particular leaderboard. So yeah, let's start talking about my June reads. So June has been a great reading month for me. I finished 8 books, which is my highest so far in any month in this particular year. It's 2 more than my previous high, and it's also a very good quality kind of reading month. The first book that I finished was Memorial by Brian Washington. This is a queer themed book, just in time for Pride Month, I guess you might say, but honestly I don't think you should carve out just 1 month in a year to read queer themed books. You should just pick them up whenever and wherever. This is a lit fic book. It's a romance, but it's not completely a romance. It is about 2 gay men called Mike and Benson who are living together. Now their chemistry in their relationship is a little lacking, but when we are reading this book, there is a change in their living circumstance. Now Mike's father lives in Japan and he is ailing. He is currently terminal, so he goes out to Japan to kind of care for him, kind of reacquaint himself with his father because they've lost touch and they've fallen out over the years. The day he is flying out, his mother, who's also Japanese, comes to visit him and stay with him for a few weeks. So while Mike is off in Japan with his father, his mother is staying with his partner Benson in their apartment. Kind of more of a coming of adult age kind of book. Both the people are kind of on their different paths, trying to get better at adulting, so to speak, with parents, with relationships, with grief, with loss, with trauma. They're just trying to come to terms with them. Really very less romance in it, except when either of them is recalling flashbacks of how they met and how their relationship has progressed and all of that. And it's not exactly like syrupy sweet kind of romance. It's a romance fraught with tension, and there's a lot of complicated issues which they're dealing with. I don't want to give away any spoilers. The good thing about this book is it has a lot of representation. Benson is black, Mike is Japanese, one of them is dealing with AIDS. So there's a lot of representation. So we get to hear a lot of perspective of people that maybe we often forget in our fiction. But really the biggest drawback of this book is I found that there was no proper plot to it. Like there was a lot of perspective, there was a lot of conversation by each of these characters, but there was no hook to the plot. Like there was no structure to it. It was more character based, I would say, and traditionally I don't do well without any proper structured plot. So that's why I felt that this book was very draggy in parts, and it was very slow and very boring, I would say, unfortunately, in parts. So that's why I rated this book only 3 stars out of 5. Next book that I finished in June is the flavor of the season. It is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. This is such an anticipated book by the entire book community because it is by a beloved author, plus it is a book about books and it is a romance about books. And I had to read it and check it out for myself. Now this book is a romance book, and it is about Nora, who's a cutthroat literary agent. Nora is the kind of person who is very ambitious, and she makes no apologies for the ambition and the drive that she has in herself. But all the men that she dates end up going to like a small town to visit, and there they fall in love with the sweet little girl running the bakery or the bookstore, and they dump Nora because she seems too cold and calculating, whereas they've fallen in love with this girl next door kind of vibe. Cut to Nora and her sister Libby. They end up going on this vacation in a small town. Over there Nora meets this guy that she had previously come to blows with. Like she really had a very fraught relationship, and he was a book editor. Now they are discovering things about each other that they didn't really know in their first meeting, which kind of put them on opposite sides of the field. And will romance spring in this small town? That is left to be seen. This book is just so full of witty, cutesy, fun banter between two people, and it's the kind of banter that you would enjoy. It's not too like syrupy sweet, it's more, it's witty. There is a little bit of glamour about it, there's a little bit of, spunk about the banter. And I love such books where both the main characters are not the typical stereotypical romance hero and heroines. There is something, something more to them than that, and that this book delivers that in spades. I loved Nora's banter with the hero, but more than that, I loved Nora and her sister Libby. Their relationship is just so pure, is so sweet, and throughout the book we get to hear about how they grew up and how their relationship came to being, like how much Nora cares for Libby and vice versa. And it's just really, really sweet to read the entire backstory of their family and how Nora came to be the person that she is, and how Libby also came to be the person that she is. So I really, really enjoyed that relationship so much more. And of course, there is books, there is the publishing world, there is the literary agent world, and I mean, I am always very, very keen to read books in that setting anyway, and this book absolutely delivers. I think Emily Henry's romances are definitely for someone like me who doesn't really like the typical cookie cutter romances. She writes brilliant, funny, cute romances which are right up my alley. So love this book. I ended up rating it 4 stars out of 5, and definitely check it out if you're looking for a fun romance. Then I finished a non-fiction that I've been reading for 2 months at least. This is Desperately Seeking Shahrukh by Shrayana Bhattacharya. This is an Indian non-fiction book, and it is a very popular book in India right now because it combines two things that you would not think would go together. It combines developmental economics and Shah Rukh Khan. What the author tries to do is she maps out the personal and professional trajectories of each of these, of different women from across different classes of society, and she talks about their struggles, their quest for independence, their heartbreaks, their losses, their griefs, their trauma, the sexism that they have to face, just the regular issues that women of India face on a day-to-day basis. And then she ties all of it in together with all of these case studies is love for Shah Rukh Khan, and between retelling the stories of these women, she gives in facts and statistics about today's society and today's India for women. So while you are reading like these really startling facts and really shocking facts about the true state of women in India, you are also kind of tied into the entire story because it is a very personal anecdotes that the author has collected as well. So while at one point you are feeling despair and you're a little bereaved that this country is really not for women, you are also told about people across the country, women across the country who are just taking small steps and taking small actions for a better future, better freedom, better independence. Unfortunately, there is one drawback in this book, that it really concentrates only on the heartland of India, like the northern states and the eastern and the western belt. It really does not cover stories in the southern part of India, which is where I am from. So I'm always looking for representation in mainstream media, both fiction and non-fiction, and also traditional media from the southern states, and this book unfortunately fails in that regard. But overall, really liked this book. There are a lot of things that I've taken away from this book which I think I will remember for a lot more time than usual. So yeah, I ended up rating this book 4 stars out of 5. Next is a book I have an entire reading blog for. This is What Are You Going Through by Sigrid Nunez. I am not going to go into depth with this book because I have an entire reading log, so I'm going to link that up above. Do check it out. I talk about the plot, I talk about my feelings, and I talk about why I reached into this book in the first place. This book has themes of euthanasia, so it is definitely a tough book, but what the author does beautifully is makes it very accessible because it's a very casual conversational style of writing. It's not very up in the air kind of vocabulary. That is what I think really stands out with this book, and it also leaves so much more impact because it's not the kind of language you would expect for these themes. So I really like this book. I would definitely recommend it if anybody is looking for books in this sub-genre, so to speak, and I ended up rating this 4 stars out of 5. Do check out my vlog. I talk about the plot. Right now, I have way too many books to get through, so moving quickly on. The next book is a classic. This is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. This is a classic Edwardian the romance, I guess you could say. It is the story of Lucy Honeychurch, who is, traveling in Florence, Italy with her aunt, where, it's the first time that she has stepped out of her rigid middle class upbringing, and while she's traveling, she comes across these two men, father and son, called the Emersons. George Emerson in particular really catches her attention, and love blossoms. However, Lucy is still, very much in the traps of society, so she goes back to England. She gets engaged to another man, and unexpectedly George comes in her normal life as well. And what might that bring? This is a very thin volume, and it is more of a coming of age kind of book, where there is this young woman who is really very much trapped in the societal norms of the age about how women are supposed to be, what are they supposed to do, as against what she wants to do. She's an accomplished piano player, and one of the character remarks that Lucy really has to live her life the way she plays the piano. She just plays the piano with this joy and this lightheartedness and this full of life that she otherwise seems to be missing from her everyday life. And when she meets George Emerson, her societal ideas are kind of shaken, because he's kind of like the antithesis of all of that. But he is also going through a grief and trauma, and he also is not very much in the living state. But the book is entirely told from the perspective of Lucy, and I really loved reading her transformation from when she was in Italy to when she's back home, where she's restless and she's pining, and then her transformation into this kind of take charge kind of young woman who makes a firm decision and sticks to it. I really enjoyed her transformation, and I really enjoyed reading about her character. At different points of the book, I was just scribbling, "Go Lucy, go." And when I do that in a book, it's really one of my favorite things. Only drawback is this book is too short, and I didn't really get to see much of George Emerson. We only really hear about George Emerson from Lucy and his father and a few other characters. So we really don't know too much about George from the perspective of George. So I was kind of like aching to see like what was the deal with George, because everybody else seems to be in love with him. So I want to know why they are in love with him, why the characters seem to love him. But unfortunately, we don't get enough of that. But it is a thin volume. You get through it pretty easily, and I really liked Lucy as a character. And there's something about E.M. Forster's language. It's a very accessible classic that way. I'm rating this 4 stars out of 5. The only gripe I have with this book is it's too short. So yeah. The next book that I finished was A Murder on Malabar Hill by Sujata Massey. This is an Indian historical fiction which is also a murder mystery actually. It's also now a series. It's called the Parveen Mistry series, and this is book 1, and it follows the life and loves of Parveen Mistry. She is fictionalized as the first Indian woman lawyer in British India, and she is not allowed to like argue in courts, but she's allowed to practice as a lawyer outside of the bar and the courts. So she works with her father's firm, and her father's firm is a well-renowned firm in Bombay, in the Bombay under the British era. So Parveen Mistry and her family are Parsis, and Parsis in their heyday back with the British were a very powerful community. They still are, but back then they had powers higher up than like the natives, like how the Britishers would call like the rest of Indians. So Parveen gets entangled in this case where a Muslim businessman has passed away, and he leaves his property to his 3 wives, and there is like an outside influence who's trying to not give these women their due, and these women are in parda. They're not allowed to like step out of their house and not show their face to outsiders. So it's really up to Parveen to make sure that they get their due, and there is another untimely murder which occurs in all of this, and then she gets involved in that as well. The thing about this book is I really did not care about the mystery at all. Like I could not care less about the mystery. What I really was interested in and what kept me hooked to this book was just the setting. Like Bombay in the 1900s in British era, and the Parsi culture in general is just so full of interesting tips, and it's just so interesting because it's so very different from the life of regular Indians, that I was very much in it for the setting. So that's why I rated this book 3.5 stars out of 5. Though I really liked reading it, it was not for the purpose that the book was written for. So yeah. Next book that I finished was a memoir. This is Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. I actually was listening to this on audiobook, but towards the end I switched to the ebook because I just loved it so much that I really wanted to highlight each and every single thing. Now, Michelle Zauner is a singer-songwriter. She has a band. She has like one of those alternative rock kind of bands, and this is her memoir of how she dealt with losing her mother to cancer and the grief and the trauma that came with trying to care for her mother and after her mother passed away. Now Michelle Zauner is Korean American. Like, her mother was Korean and her father was American, and she is a second generation American. So we get to really delve deep into her childhood, about why she grew so attached to her mother because of how much her mother was involved in her upbringing, and just the role of food, Korean food, how much that tied into her entire upbringing and in her life. This book is heartbreaking. It is stunning. It is beautifully written. It will make you cry. It will make you want to eat, because there's just so many gorgeous descriptions of food in here. Like, I've had very little Korean food in my entire life, but after reading this book I want to eat each and every dish that Michelle has mentioned in her name. But more than the food descriptions, what really struck with me is just the writing. It's pure, it's raw. I was also listening to the audiobook, which is narrated by the author herself. So just listening to her read her own words, read about her own grief that she had gone through, is it hits you really, really hard. It made me cry. I was listening to this in the gym and I was tearing up in the gym, and I was like, okay, I can't. I just, crying in the gym is not what I wanted, but I just could not help it. It's beautifully written. It is heartbreaking. It is stunning. It's one of those memoirs that make the genre one of my favorite genres to read right now, because you just get to hear so much perspective on all these different people that I would not otherwise have, because I don't know Michelle. I didn't know who Michelle was before that, but now I want to eat the food that she's eaten grown up. I want to meet her mother. Unfortunately, I can't do that. I want to meet Michelle. I want to see her concerts. I want to listen to her music. I want more from this person, and it's just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I think she really has to write another book. I don't know what it has to be about, but she absolutely has to write another book. I rated this 5 stars out of 5. The last book that I finished in June was The Honjin Murders by Seishei Yokomitsu. This is a murder mystery set in like this small town, and this actually is a translated book of a classic murder mystery of Japan. I think this was written in the 1900s and is only just beginning to, the series is only just beginning to get translated into English. This is the story of a murder which takes place in the small Japanese town after a wedding has happened. It seems to be a closed room murder, but there are a few sinister elements, like there's a samurai sword driven into the snow outside the house. There is like this musical instrument which everybody heard right before the bodies were discovered. So there are a few sinister elements, and there's one famous detective whose name is, I will tell you, I don't want to butcher this name, is Kosuke Kindaichi, who comes and solves the murder. Yeah, I think this particular series is very much of the time, so it's very difficult to relate with any of this book. It gives a heavy dose of Japanese culture if anybody is interested in that, but it gives a dose of Japanese culture which is again of the time of the early 1900s. So I don't know how much of it is relevant today, but I don't know, I found the mystery very bland. I mean, maybe it has a little to do with the subtext which was lost in translation as well. So found the mystery to be a little bland. There was a twist that I didn't expect. It was not like other mysteries where I guessed who the murderer was. It was not like that, but honestly the reveal was a little okay, so nothing great. So unfortunately I rated this book only 2 stars out of 5. These are all the books that I read in June 2022. Now quickly, I feel like this is a very, very long video, but very quickly let me talk to you about the best and the least favorite books. I think the best book, no prizes for guessing. I have raved more than other books in this video about this book. It is Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. There is a memoir, non-fiction added to the rankings, and this one is a very strong contender for sure. I loved this book. I'm going to recommend this. I want to write a blog on this. I want to write an Instagram post for this. I want people to read this book. So my least favorite, again, no prizes for guessing, I just said it as well, has to be the Honjin Murders. Just not in 2022. Probably this would have really been popular in the 19th century, I'm sure. So yeah, I'm sorry, in the 20th century. So yeah, that's all. Those were my reads for June 2022 and my best and my least favorite reads. Please like, share, comment, subscribe if you're still watching. It means the world to me, and I'll see you very, very soon.